know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to punklottopod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we choose 1 year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. Today was a little bit of a listener's choice. Little bit. I'll explain that. So we put up a poll of a couple different albums from the same year. 1990 is the year that we were talking about today. We put up a poll, and it wound up being a three-way tie.
Of how many votes?
It was all the Patreon voters. So we had, well, it's not even all the Patreon people, but we had 11 votes on the Patreon. So a three-way tie out of 11. So whatever that was. It was like 27%, 27%, 27%, and then like 13%. But yeah. So yeah, it was a little bit up to the listeners, but then they couldn't decide either, which was funny because that was the whole reason why we put the poll up in the first place, is because I couldn't decide what to talk about, and neither could they apparently. But upon putting the poll out there, I think we discovered what we would feel like we would have the most to talk about pretty easily. So we'll talk about those other possibilities whenever we get to the charts section. But if you want to vote in a poll like that, head on over to our Patreon, where you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio for $1. And last week we did a Master Punk Theater, which is our movie review series based on tangentially punk films. And we covered the 1990 film Pump Up the Volume, a music movie slash not really, but yeah, we had a really good time talking about that.
It does relate to the album we're talking about in kind of two ways, which we'll get into, but
Yeah, it was a funny little happenstance, or I was like, oh, I didn't know they had a song on here too. But yeah, if you head over there, $1 gets you all of that bonus audio. I've been tossing around the idea of bringing back New Release Friday, except maybe not on Friday. It might just become a just like New Release Weekly, where I just talk about the stuff that came out that week. Because with my work schedule, I don't really have time to listen to as much music before I go to work on Friday. It'll be more of just like what I listen to across the week, but that will be returning shortly. Maybe I'll relaunch that along with our $5 tier whenever we get ready for that, which will include producer credits and live streams. But if you want to choose the album we talk about on the show without any voting necessary, like you could just say, talk about this, and we'll do it. Do the $10 one-time donation. You can pick anything within reason. We have some veto power, but pick an album, we'll talk about it. So we've done a bunch of those in the past. They're really fun. I love doing those. And it takes the choosing out, which is always really fun. You can get all that patreon.com/punklottopod. You can follow us on all forms of social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at punklottopod. Our voicemail line 202-688-PUNK. Our email address is punklottopod@gmail.com. And yeah, I think that's everything. So when it's just you and me, I either assign you the year or I assign me the year. I need to have you start assigning the year. I don't know how or what you would do, but
I guess I could give you the decade and you pick the year.
Just based on our rotation.
What we haven't done in a while.
Because that's really the main way I choose what year to assign. When we have a guest, I'll ask them what decade are they most comfortable with, and just to get an idea, because I don't want to give somebody like a year that they're like, I don't know any of these bands, because we've had that happen before. So I get an idea of their frame of reference for the type of music they know. And then I assign them a year based on the year we've covered in the longest amount of time. So when it's just you and I, we tend to just rotate through the decades. And so, because we're down to talk about any decade. And we hadn't done the 90s in a couple weeks. So I was like, okay, we're due for the 90s again. And I was like, okay, 1990 is the one we haven't done in the longest. I think it was like January of 2022 was the last time we did 1990. So I was like, okay, let's do that year. And funnily enough, I don't know what year that was. It might have been 2013. I did this really long project where I listened to as much music from the year 1990 as I possibly could. And I did like a big blog post. It was like top 25 albums turning 25 on our old blog. And I was like, I know a lot of these records really well. I don't know quite what to pick. So that's when I came up with the choice of just doing like a poll. And so the 4 albums that we had selected, I'll tell you the other 3 first. So the one that came in last place, we'll talk about that one first. That was Remain Sedate by Rorschach. Which, excellent record. Part of the reason why I was torn on which one to do is because I was like, man, if we do that Rorschach record rules. There's 2 main Rorschach LPs. I think this one's the better of the 2. The other one's called Protestant, I believe. And Remain Sedate, I think, just was so cool and way ahead of its time. Just like a hard ripping, hardcore, metallic hardcore thing. It didn't even predate like Integrity. And I feel like I don't know if they were an influence on Integrity, because I don't know who influenced Dwid, but the Satanic Verses.
Slayer? I don't know. What was Dwid listening to?
I don't know. I could see Slayer.
Celtic Frost?
But yeah, that Rorschach album rules.
Yeah, it's a great record. Rorschach, when you sent me those 4, I was like, man, that Rorschach it's a really good one. And I think I didn't push for that one just because I think, like, how much can we say? Hardcore can be tricky. I think Rorschach, there's enough, these artists, these people were also in this band. There's enough of that stuff to kind of branch off to talk about. Rorschach would be a good one to talk about at some point, though. Yeah.
And beginning our 3-way tie, we had Helmet and their album Strap It On, which was the very first Helmet album.
Yeah, which I was like, not that one. if we're gonna do a Helmet episode, I would say Unsung or Betty.
Yeah,
the one I would pick. But
yeah, those are the big ones. I've heard this album before, and it's not my favorite Helmet record. I think I like all the other ones I've heard more. It's the very first one, so they hadn't quite nailed down the sound. Well, I take that back. The sound is there. Like, it sounds like Helmet, but I don't think like the songwriting is quite there yet. I think they get better as they go on. But that was actually, I was surprised to see that one as popular as it was, because it's not like the Helmet record. Our other tie was No Depression by Uncle Tupelo. It's one down, there's much you miss, working on that graveyard shift. And this was the other one where I was very much like, should we do this one? Because one, the record's amazing. It is the Uncle Tupelo record to do. My only hesitancy was like, is it punk enough? But I guess it's almost as punk as the one we're talking about today, really.
Yeah. It's probably one of the most punk country records ever recorded.
I'd say there's like some Lucero that might get there more. Like Nobody's Darlings.
Depends on how actually country you consider Lucero.
Yeah.
I think Uncle Tupelo comes closer to being truly country music. Lucero is more like Southern rock in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Nobody's Darling. Yeah, it's pretty country record. Tennessee for sure. Of the Lucero records. Yeah, this was one I was like, I really like that record. I could talk about that a lot.
What this really does is just lets us know the next 2 times we do 1990, without a guest, we know what to talk about.
Yeah.
Helmet and Uncle Tupelo. But if it was up to you, what would you select for us to talk about from 1990?
It is really close between Rorschach, Uncle Tupelo, and what we are talking about ultimately. Like, because all 3, I have different reasons for why I would want to talk about them. Like Rorschach because it rips, Uncle Tupelo because I think it's great, and how often would we have the opportunity to talk about alt country on this show? So there's plenty to talk about there. And but the record that we picked, I'm kind of glad that this is the record that we're talking about by this artist. Like,
yes,
it's the one it's the one from their discography I would actually be most inclined to talk about on this show. It's not my favorite, which we'll get into, but I think it's the one that's most deserving of conversation, especially in relation to what we generally talk about on this show, and might be the one that's best classified as a punk record of their 4.
Yeah. part of my reason for selecting these four is because I wanted to choose an album by someone that we have not devoted an episode to before, because there was a lot of other like really, really great selections from 1990 that I was just like, that'd be cool to talk about. This would be a good one. But I was like, but we've done another album by them in the past. Or like one that I was definitely leaning towards was Black Sheets of Rain by Bob Mould.
It's too late, it's too late, it's too late to cover what you've done. It's too late.
It might be my favorite solo Bob Mould record, but we've also done like 3 Husker Du albums on the show at this point. No, even 4, because we did the very first record with John Russell of Gnawing a long time ago, but then we've done Flip Your Wig and Zen Arcade. And then I even did Candy Apple Gray for the Dance of Days series. So, like, we've devoted a lot of time to Husker Du. And yes, Bob Mould is solo, but we've talked about his songs a lot in the past. So I was like, let's go a different direction. Even though I genuinely love that album. I put that up there with, like, the 2 Sugar records as far as, like, some of his best post-Husker Du stuff. I was also very strongly thinking about Fuel's self-titled album. The original Fuel, not the grunge one. The Berkeley. Were they Berkeley? They definitely played Gilman. Sarah Kirsch Band. Their One Lone LP. Incredible album. Probably my favorite record of 1990, if we're being completely honest. The album is incredible. Just this awesome, like, emo core, post-hardcore thing. So good. Predates a lot of the Hot Water Music sound, which they definitely borrowed from. Leatherface released Fill Your Boots, which is one of the pre-Mush albums. And I love Fill Your Boots. I think it's a fantastic record. But like I said, we've done Mush before on the show, so I was like, we can wait on that one.
The Leatherface records are so consistent that for the purposes of our show, we probably don't ever need to talk about another Leatherface record.
Yeah.
Of course, if someone wants to talk about a Leatherface record, especially if they're going to be like, Stormy Petrel is amazing, that's the record they want to talk about. Like, sure, that's an off the beaten path choice to make. But really, almost everything that we said about Mush, you can say about every other Leatherface record. It's like they're such a consistent band, and what makes Mush the record that it is it's just like it's that 2% better that it is than every other record in their discography. It's such a small difference.
And we have in the past covered, way back in episode 55, Slapshot's Sudden Death Overtime. But we also did on that episode Rain's Lavashki Rit, which that was the main star of that episode to me. That was also an episode. We did that episode with Adam Yo. I think that might have been one of our first Adam Yo episodes, actually, now that I think about it. But yeah, I love that Rain EP. It's like 6 songs, but so good. And then in episode 124, we covered Jawbreaker's Unfun, which we did that with Angelo of Magazine Beach, who they put out a new record this year that is very good, that everyone should go check out. But really, it's the worst Jawbreaker record, too. Well, Bivouac.
No, Bivouac is the worst Jawbreaker record. I love Unfun.
I think Bivouac has higher highs than Unfun, but also lower lows. Like, there's stuff on there that I'm just like, I do not want to hear that.
Yeah, as an album, I kind of put Unfun on the same level with Dear You.
I don't think that's true at all.
It's 24-hour, Dear You and Unfun, and then Bivouac. That's my Jawbreaker ranking.
And then in episode 172, we covered Goo by Sonic Youth with Chris from Big Nothing. And now that we've had some time since we'd listened to that Sonic Youth record, do you like them any more than you did?
No, yeah, they're about the same to me.
Yeah. I just have a more of a less disdain for them than I used to have. I really did not like them. And even listening to that Goo record, I was like, I still don't love it.
Yeah, Sonic Youth, I feel about, the way I feel about them is that they are a band that I respect, for sure. Not mad at anybody for loving Sonic Youth. And they are, because of that, I have given them many chances. And I have listened to enough of different records in their discography to say I'm not really interested in that band. But it's cool for everyone else.
Is there anything else from 1990 that you'd be interested in?
Stay Sick by the Cramps.
Yeah, that would be cool. Cramps was another one that I've done. We did the episode Songs the Lord Taught Us, and then I did for Dance of Days, I did another one of their records. I'm trying to Date with Elvis. That's the one I did with that one. So that was one I was just like, okay. I think I've said all that I can say about the Cramps without a guest being on the show.
I really like Ben Hur by Bitch Magnet. It's a really good record. One that I'm not sure that I would pick because I don't know how much I would have to say about it.
Because we've done a lot of those kind of bands in the last year too.
Yeah, and I feel like we kind of land on the same points every time. Mm-hmm. It's that's a really interesting part.
Yeah, I'd say that's similar to what the Shiner album we did, and the Chavez record, and the Crown Hate Ruin.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of those kind of bands.
I think, yeah, it's Soo Young Park of Seam, and I'm glad that we talked about the Seam because I think that's a band that I had more to say about than Bitch Magnet. I'm very intrigued by this is not a punk record, I guess, Bloodletting by Concrete Blonde. I think that would be an interesting record to dig into because that is a very strange band.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff that is interesting to me, though, is it's redundant. It's too much stuff that we've talked about before on this show.
Yeah. Well, then let's get into the record that actually won. Well, it didn't win the poll. Like I said, it was a 3-way tie. But Dylan and I decided we would be the tiebreaker in this instance. And after hearing a little bit of feedback from different people about this album, I think we were like, all right, I think this is the one to go with because I think you and I have the most to talk about with this album. So we are talking about Bossanova by the Pixies. A couple stats on the band. The Pixies are from Boston, Massachusetts, and they formed in 1986. That's the year I was born. And they released this album on August 13th, 1990 on 4AD Records in the UK, and then distributed in the US on Elektra Records. This is the band's third full-length album, and was their follow-up to their most successful album to date, Doolittle. And the personnel on this record is Black Francis on guitar and vocals, Kim Deal on bass and vocals, David Lovering on drums and vocals, and Joey Santiago on guitars. And the album was produced by Gil Norton, who previously produced their last record. And let's talk about before we get into the details of the actual album, let's talk about our individual histories with the Pixies. So I've talked a lot, so you go first.
So my Pixies history goes back to let me find the year. It's very specific. To the 2004 recorded, I think, broadcast in 2005 episode of Austin City Limits, where they played a reunion show. Because they had been, how long were they done? Was that like the first reunion by the Pixies?
I think 03 was when they first started getting back together. But yeah, 04 I think was like when they were doing their first shows back.
I saw that on TV, just on PBS, whatever channel showed Austin City Limits in our region on like I don't know what night it would have been. I think typically they showed those on the weekend, so it would have been like a weekend night. I was 15, 14 maybe, depending on when this was actually broadcast, and just flipping through the channels, not interested in what else was on. It just happened to be on, I guess, within that like small window where there's not a Simpsons rerun to watch, whatever syndication that we watched. I want to say they showed it on Sunday nights, so it's not like Saturday Night Live would have been an option. It would have been before that anyway. It would have been probably like at 10 o'clock. And I just happened to land on it. Like I just see this band performing. I never really watched Austin City Limits before then, so it wasn't really a show I was aware of or tuning in to watch. So just happened to see them, and I heard enough of the music to be like, oh, I'm interested in this. And then so I just watched like the rest of that performance. I don't remember the whole set list. I want to say I can find that set list. I want to say one of the songs that jumped out to me, they did play Cactus from Surferosa. And that song in particular really stood out to me in that performance. And I wouldn't have known anything else, but that was my favorite of what I saw from that set. And then there's kind of after the performance, there's a little bit of a interview segment that kind of like rolled over the credits, I think. And they were just like talking to them about the reunion. And so it was like, oh, this is a legendary band that has just reunited. This band I don't know anything about is now in my head a hallowed band. So it really kind of from there had a pretty consistent but muted interest in the Pixies. Because I didn't dive into their discography after that. It was just kind of like, oh, that's an interesting band. I will file that away. And then I think probably in college got really into Surferosa as a record and listened to most of their other discography. But I loved Surferosa. I loved that record from beginning to end. It's almost a 5-star record for me. And it's the one that I come back to the most because I don't go through a lot of Pixies phases. So when I do, I reach for the one that's going to give me the automatic serotonin familiarity, boost and be like, yeah, I love this record. But over the years, I've listened to other records in their discography. I have heard all of their first 4 records, and I'm pretty familiar. I think the 4th record I don't know as well, but say that, and I can look at the track listing, and I'm like, I know Trompe Le Monde has like Alec Eiffel and UMass and Bird Dream of Olympus Mons. I don't know. There's songs I know on that record too. So it's probably the one I've just willfully put on the least.
It's funny that you tell the Austin City Limits story because I remember you telling me about it after you watched it. I remember you being like, hey, there's this band, they're called the Pixies. They're kind of like a punk band. And I remember being like, what? Who is this band? Who is this punk band we've never heard of called the Pixies? And you're like, they've been around for a really long time too. And I was like, what? Why didn't I know that? Like, it was really weird that like I'd heard of Husker Du and like Fugazi and all these other bands when I was younger even, but the Pixies was one that I was just like, who is that? Like, I don't know how they had missed me at that point.
Well, so what it is, I mean, they're not a punk band, which is why we hadn't heard of them within the context of punk. They're an alternative band, but they're one of those alternative bands that didn't get played on our alternative rock radio stations.
True. Though over time, I would eventually be like, I know that song. Like, because it would get used in like movie trailers and commercials, like in the late 90s and the 2000s before. Like, I think the first time I ever heard like Here Comes Your Man in the context of the Pixies, I was like, oh, I feel like I've seen this in a commercial for like something or a movie. And even Gigantic, I feel like got used to in like trailers. Like I encountered Pixies songs before, but did not know who the Pixies were and did not know that those were Pixies songs when I'd heard them. So my real introduction, besides you telling me that about them, which is always funny to have that telling each other about a band before like either of us had heard anything, it was a very funny way of, because that would happen a few times. And Lost City Limits was always a frustrating show for me when I was younger, because I like maybe saw somebody cool on there one time that I knew, and then I never recognized another single artist ever again on that show. Anytime at like 15, 16 years old, like changing channels, be like, who's on tonight? And I'm like, I don't know who that is. It's country, because they always did a lot of country stuff and folk stuff. But I guess my real introduction to the Pixies would be Where Is My Mind being played over the end credits of Fight Club, which is such a like bro-y way to be introduced to the Pixies, and to be like, yeah, Fight Club? Have you seen Fight Club? Oh my God, it's so cool. I've never read Fight Club, so I can't be that guy, thankfully.
Yeah. My favorite book is Fight Club.
Oh no.
That's worse than Fight Club is my favorite movie, guys.
Yeah, Fight Club is movie poster guy. It's like Fight Club and Kill Bill always on like the same guy's walls in their dorm.
Because Fight Club movie guy is a populist. He's kind of dumb, but he's a common man. Fight Club book guy is smarter than you. And that's annoying.
And so Pixies were like a band that I was like, I probably downloaded like random songs over the years too. And then like, I was like, okay, I was like, let's dive into the Pixies. The first album I bought it on CD when I worked at Barnes & Noble. One of the handful of times where I was like, I would like to purchase a CD, and bought it. This was still like, vinyl wasn't really back yet, or like it was for some, it was mainly like old stuff. And so I bought it, and my coworker who shares the same birthday as me, which I always thought was very funny, because we like haven't seen each other in years, and we still will say happy birthday to each other on Facebook, just because it's like we have the same birthday. And she was like, let me know if it's any good, because she for some reason had never really listened to the Pixies either. She was like me, like just like, we should both be familiar with this band, but we weren't for whatever reason. And like I fell in love with that record wholeheartedly. I was just like, this record's fucking amazing. I love it. Except for Tony's song, worst song on the album. And then I had our other friend, Grant, who runs Bitter Melody Records. He was like, Doolittle's better. And I was like, really? And it took me forever to listen to it. And then one day I was like asleep. And then like I saw that I had like 5 missed calls from him. And I was like, what the hell? So I called him back. He's like, why didn't you answer your phone? I was like, oh, I was asleep. He's like, well, the Pixies are playing Doolittle in its entirety in Asheville. I was calling to ask you if you wanted to go, but I just went ahead and bought you a ticket. I was like, whoa, oh, okay. I probably would have said no, because the tickets were like $50. He's like, they're $50, but I already bought them, so you're going. So I went and saw the Pixies the night of my roommate's wedding. And I lied and said I had to work. I was just like, look, he bought these tickets. I'm going to see the Pixies. Like, and I don't like you guys that much. So and I listened to Doolittle a lot, because Grant also burned me a copy of it on CD. He's like, here, you need to listen to this. So I had it, and he burned me a copy of that with End of a Year's You Are Beneath Me, because I hadn't burned a copy for myself yet, and he had. He's like, do you have this? He didn't want to waste the CD, so he was like, do you have this one? Okay, I'll put it on there too. Back in our days where you just like, here, I burned it for you. And my wife and I, and at the time we were literally just starting to date, spent like a month driving around Hickory with that in her CD player as we were like looking for apartments. So like Doolittle got played on repeat a lot while we were trying to find a place to live. So because we were getting kicked out by those roommates who just got married. So Pixies are pretty like, Doolittle is there for me in a very significant period of my life. So, yeah.
There's this old woman. She lives down the road. You can often find her kneeling inside of her home. And I often ask her, are you looking for a mother love? No. No, my child, this is not my desire. And then she said, I'm digging for fire. I'm digging for fire. I'm digging for fire. I'm digging for fire. I'm digging for fire.
So, Bossanova, the third album by the Pixies. I listened to it when I did that project where I was doing albums from 1990 back then, and I remember liking it but not loving it, and just I don't think I included it even in my top 25 for that year. I think that was just me going like, it's pretty good. It just didn't hook me at the time. But yeah, so this record was released at a pretty chaotic period for the Pixies. After Doolittle was released, Kim Deal and Frank Black, they were not getting along. They did a show in Stuttgart where he threw a guitar at Kim. Then they almost fired Kim from a show in Frankfurt. She was refusing to play, so they threatened to fire her. I don't know if she wound up actually playing that show or not. And the argument really came between, there was just a power struggle between Frank and Kim. Kim wanted more of her songs on the records, which is understandable because she was a songwriter in her own right. And she'd written some really great songs for the first two albums. So yeah, of course you want to get more stuff out there. And then Frank, I get the impression Frank was difficult to work with, and he just did not want to give up that power. But that's a dynamic that's happened a lot of times with any band that has two songwriters in it. There's a lot of times one that just does not want to let go of that because they feel threatened by it. And Kim, I think eventually was just like, fine, Frank, it's Frank's band now. And they stopped talking. They just didn't talk to each other anymore. They had been touring pretty much nonstop since Doolittle came out. They were exhausted. They were really all fighting each other. And when they finished their post Doolittle tour, they went on hiatus. So in that time, David and Joey, they just go on vacation because they're like, cool, we're not touring right now. Let's go on vacation. Frank goes on a solo tour, and then Kim starts the Breeders. So clearly, that's the definition of this is their dynamics. David and Joey are just along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't do anything until we get to the studio.
Yeah.
We don't have songwriting duties. And yeah, Kim is probably looking for her way out with the Breeders. Just being either it's just her outlet for her songs, or it's I need to get another band to take off. I gotta leave the Pixies. I can't do this shit.
Yeah. So Kim is in England. She's recording the first Breeders album, which was released in 1990. Pod is the name of that record. We could talk about that later. So she's in England. She's doing that. And then the band's like, well, hey, let's just go record the record. They went to Los Angeles. They moved to Los Angeles, the three of them, because I think they were still in Massachusetts before. And they said they moved there just because that's where the recording studio was. So they moved out there. They move into this apartment complex that they share. It's the same apartment complex that Garrett Morris of SNL lived in, and as well as members of White Lion.
Yeah. And Gil Norton also moved in to produce the record.
Yeah, their producer. And so, yeah, Kim's in England. She's recording that Breeders record with Steve Albini. So she won Steve in the battle, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Albini did Surfer Rosa, but he didn't do Doolittle. Gil Norton did Doolittle. And so the band booked studio time. And then for some reason, they didn't have a lot of time to practice beforehand, because what they would do before is they would just practice like crazy, like the songs over and over and over again before they went into the studio. And so they didn't actually like write a lot of the songs until they were in the studio. And that Frank writes most of the songs. Kim flies back from England to join them in the studio. I guess she's just like, well, I'm going to be on this record, even if I'm not writing the songs, because who knows if the Breeders is going to take off, you know. And then the recording was supposedly pretty tough. They couldn't record after 6 p.m. because the board would pick up a pirate radio station. There we go. Tying into our Pump Up the Volume bonus audio there. So basically they're just like, God damn it. And so while they were waiting for that, they ran into another problem where the guitar, when it was plugged in, would just make a really loud hum. So I guess there's like something was wrong with like the wiring or the grounding or something in there. And I think the band and the producer had run into Rick Rubin at a bar and then was telling them like, man, the studio's a piece of shit. And then so he had his secretary find them a new studio. And then that's where they went in and actually recorded the record.
Yeah, there's there's like 5 studios that are listed on this record. Cherokee, which is the one where they were having all of the sound issues in Hollywood. And then there's like something in Glendale and Silver Lake Studios, which I'm like, I don't know a Silver Lake studio, which I was kind of looking into that earlier. And it's, I believe it was a studio on Hyperion Avenue. So it's kind of like northern Silver Lake. And it was owned by Steve Millang from like 75 to 98. And he relocated to Acton, California. He was part of a children's folk duo called Steve and Greg. So just a guy with a studio where they were using his space. Doesn't really have anything to do with the record. It's just weird. Which that property is currently available, I believe, for mixed use, live work. And then there's like one song was recorded while they were on tour. Blown Away was written and recorded. It was written in Spain while they were on tour, and then it was recorded when Gil was flown in at Hansa Ton Studio in Berlin after a Pixies show. So one song on here was recorded while they were on tour before the record even was recorded, like slated to be recorded. Most of it probably wasn't written yet.
And yeah, so the big noticeable difference on this record from Doolittle is there is a very heavy surf influence on this album. And I'd say there's even like maybe a little bit more of a punky approach to some of the songwriting as well. And I guess we'll open up now to like talking about the actual album. So before we've recorded, you've intimated to me that you've got some hot takes on Bossanova.
So we'll go ahead and get this out of the way. I don't love Doolittle. As an album, I just, from beginning to end, it is not a consistently enjoyable record for me. I haven't spent enough time with Trompe Le Monde, so I don't know where that one sits. I think there's incredible songs on Doolittle. Obviously, Wave of Mutilation, Here Comes Your Man, Gouge Away, Debaser. There's tons of great stuff on that record. And I think that's a record with a really good collection of songs, but it also has stuff that I can't stand, that I cannot listen to. It is a multiple skips album to me. And I've never really fully understood why it's the one that people love when Surfer Rosa is right there. Surfer Rosa is my favorite. It's the one I can enjoy listening to from beginning to end the most, with maybe moments here and there that I don't love, but nothing I really want to skip. I don't even hate Tony's theme the way that you do.
I just hate the way it starts. This is a song about a superhero named Tony. I'm like, this is stupid.
So I like Bossanova more than Doolittle, which most people do not agree. And most people that we've talked to, and a lot of people that I've encountered online, think Trompe Le Monde is better than Bossanova, which I can probably see the argument for that. Kim probably has more to contribute to Trompe Le Monde.
Trompe Le Monde's my least favorite. It's too weird. To me, it doesn't even sound like a Pixies record. but I've also not spent a ton of time with it. My prior feelings on Bossanova before revisiting it for the show, I was like, it was just there. Like, it was just like fine. It's like Come On Pilgrim for me. It's just like pretty good. And that's the extent of my feelings about it.
Yeah, I had my first impression of Bossanova was that it's fine. It's not really like, it just doesn't have standout songs, or it didn't to me on that first listen. I want to say it was probably like 2015 the first time I really listened to it. But I did really love the song Javelina off of this record. I listened to that song a bunch. It became one of the Pixies songs that I reached for. It probably is my favorite Pixies song.
Weird. Of
all time. It's an odd choice, and it's an unusual Pixies song, which it kind of became. I guess it became of personal significance as like moving to Arizona. It's about Arizona, so that's tying it to a place for me specifically. But so like I kind of held this record, my opinion of it, as being like, yeah, it's not as good as the first two. Which, I didn't even have that strong of an opinion of Doolittle as being the great record. I just kind of like repeated what most people said about it. But I would, because of Javelina, I would kind of like come back to it. So, and I want to say maybe in 2018 or 2019, I gave it like another like serious listen, like from beginning to end. It would have been 2019. In October, actually. Yeah, because I did listen to it coming back from a trip to San Francisco. And so to me, this record is permanently the soundtrack for early evening, just after sunset, past dusk, somewhere in California on the 5, which is a stretch from like Modesto to Bakersfield that is just nothing. It is absolutely barren and hostily sparse. So this record to me sounds like driving at night in the middle of nowhere, California, and like listening to it in that like isolated, I have nothing to do but focus on this. I think my wife had even fallen asleep, so I'm just driving with this record, listening to every song intently, and I'm like, this is good. Like picking out the individual songs and being like, oh, that's a really good song. Oh, that song was really good. Oh, that one was really good. Why did I think this was a boring, forgettable record when there are so many standout songs on it? And I think it's a sneaky one. I think it's such a consistent sounding record that if you're not paying attention, it's easy to gloss over because it doesn't have the extreme variety that especially a record like Doolittle has, and even Surferosa to some extent, in terms of the different kinds of songs that they did on those records. They don't do that on this record, largely because Kim doesn't contribute.
She has some backing vocals, and she plays bass on the record, but yeah, she doesn't have any songwriting credits, I don't think.
To the
So I was trying to figure out too, like, where does that notion that Bossanova is just like, it's fine. Why people are just like, yeah, those two are the main ones that anybody like really cares about with the Pixies. Because even like I was like looking at reviews for preparation for the show, and I'm like, listen to this: 4.5 stars, All Music; 5 stars, Blender; A-, Entertainment Weekly; 3 stars, LA Times. Okay, whatever. Enemy, 9 out of 10. Pitchfork, 9 out of 10. Q, 4 out of 5 stars. Rolling Stones, 3 stars. Man, the mainstream publications are not faring well. Select, 4 out of 5, and the Village Voice gave it an A. It's well regarded. It's positively reviewed, with the exception of LA Times and Rolling Stone. What do they know? So it's like, why in my brain am I like, Bossanova's one that's fine? It's like, those are really good grades for an album. Is it because it's just kind of a more of the same? But it's not really more of the same.
It's not. I mean, it's taking something that has been embedded in the Pixies from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It is ultimately kind of just mostly a surf punk record.
Yeah.
And it's taking that element from the first 2 records and running with it on every song.
Yeah, because it feels more like an actual combination of Surfer Rosa and Doolittle. Like, it feels more like a mixture of those 2 records than... Because those records are almost like polar opposites in like style and songwriting. Doolittle being the more exploratory and experimental songs, and Surfer Rosa being the little bit like the punkier, harder edged record. So this album feels like just like a really good mixture of those 2 albums, with like an emphasis more on the surfy style guitars. But there's even like that Doolittle kind of sounds on this album too. Like there's songs that feel very much like they would have been on Doolittle. Like Is She Weird? Like Is She Weird feels just like a Doolittle song.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I don't know why because every review online is positive, and yeah, maybe it's just because it wasn't groundbreaking and everybody knew the drama going on. Maybe
I think that it is a record that is overshadowed by the fact that this is the downward, this is the decline of the Pixies. Like from that explosion of Doolittle and of massive success for them and cultural impact that record had and has continued to have, this is kind of an unusual follow-up. It's not a difficult third album because it's not reaching for anything that weird, but it is, I'm trying to think of, I think it is a fairly safe record in a way, because it doesn't really seem to have any intention of being a difficult third record, even though creatively it is different. Like their entire creative process is very different because Kim doesn't write any songs, so there's no conflict between songwriters. There's no, I got to get my song on the record, anything like that you would have expected from the third record, especially the follow-up to Doolittle. And they didn't practice these songs. They wrote them in the studio or wrote them right before the studio. And maybe that works better for Frank.
Yeah.
Maybe when he has more time, he gets to explore his worst impulses more. And if he's has the pressure of the studio, he doesn't get to think about it that much, and he just has to go with what seems obvious. I think it worked for him on this record. I don't think that he likes this record.
But you know who does? Joey.
And Joey's a standout on this record.
It's his favorite record. He says it, which it was very funny because I was looking up articles about this album, and I read like 5 different articles interviewing Joey about Doolittle on the 30th anniversary, like because they did a reissue for it, and every single, I guess like Frank didn't want to talk about it, so he made Joey do all the interviews, and Joey, like 5 different interviews. It's like, hey everybody, some other people are going to be asking, like, do you all have to have a Bossanova article interview with Joey on the anniversary? Like, all of you have to do it? Because it was essentially like reading the same article 5 different times. I was just like, okay, people. And it was just funny to me that they got Joey on every single interview for it.
Because he gets a good set of songs to just play lead guitar on. Unimpeded. There's no weird song. I mean, there's some weird song structures. It's a Pixies. There's going to be weird song structures. But he doesn't have to compete with any like precious, like, artist controlling aspect from either of them, because Kim has her weird songs too.
Mhm.
And he just gets a basic, not basic, but he gets a rock song essentially with a strong melody on most of the songs here that he gets to then just play guitar on. And he sounds great. He's got so many great parts on here.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to serve someone else's vision, and he gets to just play at his best. And I think he's probably like one of the stronger improvisers in the band, because with this record being kind of written in the studio and recorded as quickly as it is, I'm sure they had to like kind of improvise and be decisive and say like, well, that's the part, because we don't have time to write a better part.
Yeah, and it is very much like the guitar record out of their albums, because they're doing. Yeah, I think the surf influence is definitely like a reason why a lot of these songs turned out the way they do. Revisiting it, so like getting ready for the show, what did you think of it?
So coming into revisiting this one, I'm like, I've recently listened to Doolittle and kind of come to my conclusion on how I feel about that record. And I'm like, this is one that I've changed my opinion on in the past, from not loving it to really liking it to, so I'm kind of like, I think I like this. I'm pretty sure I like this more than Doolittle. Can I rank this one on this listen? It still doesn't beat Surferosa for sure, but I was definitely excited going into it. But I'm like, I know it can even still be like kind of an uneven, odd record. And I think that the biggest mistake of the record is that it starts with the instrumental surf cover. Cecilia Ann, it's weird. It's a weird choice, and it leads into rock music, which is it's just not one of my favorite songs on the record. It's fine. So it's kind of like weird opening song, okay second song. But track 3 is Velouria, which rules.
That's interesting, because I think it actually does start in a really fun way. I think choosing to start the record with the surf tones as the original performers of the song, I thought it was like a thesis statement for the album. I was like, this is what you're in for. It's Pixies doing surf rock is what the album is going to be. And
rock music is a really hard song. So there's an intentional choice going on there, from this like playful surf instrumental to like a really hard screaming Frank song.
It's a Frank shrieking song. Like, it's definitely the heaviest song on the album, I guess. So yeah, it's definitely like, if you're not scared off by the surf, we're gonna scare you off with the shrieking. But we'd already heard shrieking on their previous record, so you're not gonna scare too many people off. But then you're right, they hit Velouria, which is one of their biggest hits, period. Like, it was number 3 on like the UK charts. The funny thing about that was they were like, because it was so popular in England, like they were then being like, well, you might have to do Top of the Pops, but if you want to do Top of the Pops, you got to make a video, because they had a rule saying you had to have a video to be on Top of the Pops.
Top of the British music shows with all their rules, requirements.
Yeah, a show where you don't perform the song yourself either. Yeah, Top of the Pops is fucking weird. And so they shot a video, it was funny. It was like a 23-second video of them like climbing over some rocks going down a hill. And they were like, okay, let's slow it down and just make it run the length of the song. Like, that was the whole video. And then they wound up not playing Top of the Pops. So I was like, what? Yeah, Velouria being like super catchy. I would say probably one of the most well-known songs in their discography, especially from the last, like, it's that and Alec Eiffel are like out of the last 2 records that are probably the most well-known. And it has that killer theremin all over it. I love that. And Velouria also kind of feels like a Doolittle song too. Like, it feels similar to some songs on Doolittle. Revisiting it for me, after not hearing it for a while, and then just kind of listening with intent to like see what's going on, because I knew your take was better than Doolittle. And I'm like, I love Doolittle. And I know the things you don't. I know the things on Doolittle that you would not like. Like, I get it. There's stuff on there where I'm like, yeah, I know why you don't like Dead. Or I know why you don't like Monkey. This Monkey's Gone to Heaven. I get it. There's weird songs on that record. That record grew on me more so I think because I was like, well, I gotta go see this record front to back, so I better listen to it. And then that's when I was just like, okay, I do love these songs now. So I was just like, okay, intently listening to this album, being like, okay, what is it? What's going on here? What are they trying differently? And ultimately, I think Bossanova is probably more of an even record than Doolittle. It's more even than that one. I do still like Doolittle better. I just think the highs are higher on Doolittle than here. But I love the hell out of this. Like, revisiting it, I was just like, this record rules. And I get why I got so many positive reviews.
Yeah. And
I guess if I think of it critically, I understand why it's like people are like third best. You know, like that's the thought. Because it's just like those first two LPs are just so highly above that it's so hard to like follow that up. But I think they followed it up well. I mean, I would have liked more Kim involvement on this record ultimately, just because I do think she is a very interesting songwriter. Sidebar, I did listen to Pod as well this week to get ready for the show. Mm-hmm. Bossanova is a better record than Pod.
Yeah, Pod doesn't, like, I don't think that she figured out what The Breeders was.
I think the next Breeders record is better, like way, way better.
Yeah.
But Pod, I was just like, yeah, this was them experimenting and trying things out. And you got Steve Albini as your producer, so he's gonna let you do the weirder stuff.
Yeah.
And so like
he's just gonna set the mics up and record it.
He lets you indulge in your like weirdo songwriting, whereas with like the next record, I think they worked with someone different who was like, okay, let's try and do something big here. And then they do like Cannonball, which was like the record's like platinum selling, so like that record did really well. But and even like tonally, like she's on the album, but like she doesn't really feel that strong of a presence. Like you can hear her do some backing vocals and like it's her playing, but it's a very guitar forward record, so like her playing is very limited, or it's lower in the mix. It's not as prominent as it was on the first two albums. But like I look at this track listing and I'm like, half of this album is excellent. Like just excellent songs.
I mean, Velouria, Allison, All Over the World, Dick for Fire,
God, yeah,
Javelina, which I'm partial to, but yeah, Stormy Weather's pretty good. Is She Weird?
That's my least favorite song.
Not great, but it's interesting and it's memorable.
Yeah, Is She Weird is probably my least favorite song, and then I would put maybe Anna right behind it because it's just like kind of whisper singing on that song.
Yeah,
and then I put Stormy Weather because I don't. It was fine. But yeah, Velouria, Allison, All Over the World is so that chorus on that song just like sticks in your head so well. And Dig for Fire. I think Dig for Fire might be the best song on the album. It's my favorite song on the album. I think it's a better single than Velouria because there's this like very 1990s sound on that song. It sounds like an NXS song almost. Like it has that. I don't think it has an electronic drum kit on it, but it has like that snare that pops just like an electric drum. Like if it had a very much like, oh, this is what you would hear on like the radio in 1990, like the pre-grunge alternative rock sound, like that just big pops on those drum kits and your NXS's and your Jesus Jones and even like what Jesus and Mary Chain were doing at this time.
Yeah, which you mentioned Jesus and Mary Chain. One of my notes is, and maybe one of the reasons why this record does appeal to me so much is Bossanova sounds like the Pixies trying to do a Jesus and Mary Chain record.
Yeah, I could see that. The later
like they were just not on tour listening to like Darklands, or
what was out by them at this point?
The first three. So it would have been
Psycho
because Automatic
Darklands
came out in '89. Yeah.
It has an automatic feel to it at times. Yeah.
It's a lot, and there's a lot of it too that reminds me, and probably because it's such a guitar forward record, a lot of it reminds me of late Husker Du and Sugar and Bob Mould, especially that kind of like intense guitar tone with really poppy melodies on a lot of these songs.
Yeah, guitar tone. Yeah, down to the Well has a riff that sounds like Nirvana stole. Like I feel like Nirvana stole that riff, and because we know Nirvana were big. Kurt Cobain was a big Pixies fan, so like that riff specifically sounded like, what did it sound like? It sounded like a late song,
like an In Utero.
Yeah, it sounds, yeah, maybe even like like a song on Unplugged. But yeah, the album has like 5 covers on it. But I thought The Happening is a really good song with this fun kind of like falsetto in there. That one has a little bit of a hook to it too. And then I like Hangwire a lot because Hangwire also felt like a harder edge Doolittle B-side.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen people say that the B-side of this record, the last half of this record falls off, and I'm like, the last half starts with Dig for Fire, is followed by Down to the Well, The Happening, which The Happening is kind of like, Gouge Away again, so not quite as good as Gouge Away, but still. Hangwire, Stormy Weather, and I think it ends very nicely. I think Javelina is a very nice ending. A soft, pretty little ending.
It's a good ender. Because I think Javelina and Cecilia Ann are like good bookends for this album. Because I don't know where else you would put the surf cover. Like, that doesn't go anywhere else on the album.
Yeah. An intermission. Yeah. Like a middle of the record thing.
You could maybe start the B side with it, but like then you bump Dig for Fire up to the A side. I like having All Over the World and Dig for Fire like splitting the sides. Like I think those are good because All Over the World has even like a Talking Heads sort of feel to it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting thing too. Is like All Over the World is like it's this 5-minute song and it's like it's got that chorus, but it also has these big long exploratory stretches. Like it is a very atypical song structure. Pretty Talking Heads for sure.
Mm-hmm. Especially like just speaking in
like,
tongues
era. We're gonna wander into this like rhythmic section.
You know how like on Burning Down the House, one of their biggest songs, it just kind of meanders off into the distance at the end. It's just like do 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 like all just the drumming just at the end of the song. It just goes like it just and it kind of just peters out too. It's just like it's so funny that it's like one of their biggest songs ever and it has a non-ending.
It's just Bernie Worrell like wiggling the little pitch bender.
Jerry Harrison. Yeah, like really paying attention to this record, I was just like, okay, this record is definitely much better than its reputation.
Yeah, which its reputation is
still positive.
Critically very well received. But as far as like the listener hits perspective, I think it just gets overlooked, and Trompe Le Monde gets overlooked against the first 2 records because they were in decline and falling apart pretty much immediately after their success.
Yeah, they broke up like right after that album was even released. Like they were done. I did kind of want to get some feedback from people. I posted it in the Discord that we were talking about this album, and so I kind of wanted to get some feedback, and then we got some comments on the Patreon too as well. And our buddy Steve Long, host of the returning podcast Punk Rock and Pinfalls, which I believe I'm going to be a guest on, talking about AEW New Japan's Forbidden Door show this weekend. So this will come out after that episode, so go back and check that out. His stance was it's not really as good as its predecessor nor the album that followed it, but it's still a solid album. Steve's a bigger fan of Trompe Le Monde, it seems. Jason, who runs the Substack Songs About Chocolate and Girls, his response was, I understand the importance of the Pixies, but I can't stand Frank Black.
Frank Black is a very annoying, disagreeable person.
Yeah. I asked him as a person or a musician, and he said person mainly, but musically as well.
Yeah.
Vocally, I've always liked Kim's songs over his. It's like, yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's very obvious that when they finally kicked Kim out of the band and then they hired Kim Shattuck to replace her of the Muffs on bass, Kim lasted like 4 months.
Yeah.
Because she was relieved of her duties or something. Like she was essentially like basically fired too, but they didn't use the word fired. I think it was just a matter of this Kim also didn't want to take Frank's shit. So they never hired a Kim again. Dave Brown of One Band 5 Songs, he said, for my money, the Pixies' best records are Doolittle and Trompe Le Monde. So there's a double like Trompe Le Monde. Maybe I need to revisit Trompe Le Monde. And then over on the Patreon, I got some comments as well. So Brian, who we actually had on the show talking about Thrice, he said, I like Helmet, but my vote's going for Bossanova. And then he sent me a message later on Instagram kind of really saying his opinion on the album. And he said, fun fact, Bossanova was the first Pixies album I ever owned. A friend of my mom's had Doolittle, and I was obsessed with it, but I could never find it at the record store down the street from me, but they did have Bossanova. So, like, that's a big one for Brian. And our Madball mystery caller told us he's a Pixies guy, and because this is when we're still voting, and he loves Frank Black's solo as well, and said Bossanova is great. The other two albums are too obvious. If you're going to talk about a Pixies record, I guess that's what, because that was our thinking too. We were just like, out of the Pixies records to talk about,
This is probably the one no one's going to choose of the four.
right?
I mean, or the fewest number of people would choose. I wouldn't say no one, because I would have chosen this one.
I think there's a chance too that, like, if we would have had a guest on and they had like a real strong affinity for this album, they would have picked it. Like, I could see, like, in the future somebody choosing Trompe Le Monde to talk about. But and I do think, yeah, Surfer Rosa and Doolittle maybe being the, like, obvious choice, that if, like, you gave them the year 89 and 88, because they did a record every year. The first three, they did 3 albums in a row in each year, and yeah, those are like the kind of obvious picks that people would just not choose those albums to talk about, because it's just kind of like, it's so on the nose when you're talking about that year. And yeah, the album actually wound up being, at the time, Doolittle was their best selling, but then Bossa Nova, like, surpassed it when it came out. It wound up being their best selling record at the time, and I think it's probably since then have been passed back over. But yeah, at the time, it did really well. The album hit number 70 on the Billboard charts in the US and number 3 in the UK. Very positively reviewed. Select magazine named it Album of the Year, and it is featured in the book 1001 Albums to Hear Before You Die.
Which is interesting, because certainly not at the expense of Doolittle.
I mean, how many Pixies records are in it then? Like, there's a chance all 3 of them are in there. Maybe all 4.
Bossa Nova and Doolittle, not Surfer Rosa, which is an interesting choice to make.
That's a bold stance, I think.
Yeah, I don't agree with it, because I believe Surfer Rosa is the best Pixies record, and it's the first one, so it's like it has that distinction. But yeah, if it pushes people to listen to Bossa Nova, which I think is an underrated record, unappreciated, not underrated. It sold well, and it was critically very well received. It's such an interesting, like, it's purely a historical devalue of the album. Yeah, like it's a retroactive overlooking of it.
Yeah, it's very strange. But even I have done it myself, so I don't know. Maybe because it's not like, I don't know. Because there's even a story behind it. You know, like the band was on the outs, they took a hiatus, they were burned out. So there is a story there too. But I guess just because it didn't take any, like, big swings. I don't know.
I think it swung more than people give it credit for. I just think that the end result is something that is much more listenable than a big swing of a record would have you think.
Yeah.
I think the choice to write and produce the record the way they did was a massive swing. It just happened to connect.
Yeah.
And when you take big risky swings like that, very few bands actually pull them off. So people just maybe think that this was more prepared than it was.
I also wanted to mention, too, that the Pixies have since reunited and released 4 more albums. And I know no one who has listened to any of them or that like them. Talk about a band who's just kind of like tarnishing their own legacy. But also, like, there's such a clear divide from the eras that nobody's like, man, these 4 new albums that nobody likes by the Pixies sure are ruining these old albums. The old albums, I guess, are just cemented in stone, and they'll never, you can't take away from them, no matter how many bad Frank Black solo records. And essentially that's what Pixies albums are now.
Yeah. Yeah. The Pixies really have 4 records that are all over 3.5 stars and 1 over 4, and 4 albums that are all under 3. Such an extreme divide.
And, like, to be fair, though, like, I listened to some of the first reunion record and I was like, this is awful. I hate this. And then never tried any of the other ones. But I've also never heard anything by anybody saying, you should listen to the new Pixies album. I've never heard a person say, you should listen to the new Pixies album. The only thing I ever heard was, did you hear that new Pixies album? Oh, man. So I don't know. if anybody out there listening to this has heard those records and thinks there's something really worthwhile checking out, maybe let us know. I'm always curious when a band has a lot more records than you remember or think of. And I'm like, what's on those? They feel like a mystery to me. Like, what are you going to get in there? I do think that if I just listen to all of them, I'm going to be like, why'd I do that?
There's been no solo Frank Black stuff since the Pixies reunion.
So that kind of gives you an idea. Now, I do understand. I've listened to some Frank Black solo stuff that I've enjoyed. So I know he has good stuff out there. I just know that he's also super hit or miss.
Yeah. I mean, his 90s stuff is like the most well regarded, but he's got some 2000 stuff that's Frank Black Francis. Like, that's a pretty well regarded, and that's 2004. So Blue Finger, that one's pretty high as well.
And the Breeders stuff is better regarded too. Maybe it's one of those things where you kind of needed that conflict, the internal turmoil to.
I mean, not necessarily, because, you know, Kim's mostly absent from this record, and I think it's great. So,
but there's still probably that seething, like,
yeah,
frustration with each other because they're not talking too, which has to lead to some like uncomfortableness in the studio if they're still not talking to each other and they're recording a record.
Which I can't even imagine. I understand getting frustrated and irritated with each other in the studio, especially if someone keeps making mistakes or, yeah, whatever. Or there's been miscommunication. Like, I understand miscommunication happening and still being able to make a record together. But I can't imagine being able to work with each other in the studio and hating each other that much.
Yeah.
But a record label, I mean, record contracts are what they are.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I mean, not that the Pixies were like a major. I mean, they were on Elektra, but that was U.S. distribution. 4AD did UK.
Yeah.
So how much were they really tied to it?
Yeah. I don't know. Well, let's give it a rating and wrap this up. What are you giving it?
I'd probably say it's like a 4.25. I mean, I have it as a 4 on Rate Your Music, so I think I liked it more than that, but I'm not to the level of putting it up to 4.5. Because, like I said, as much as I love Surferosa, it's still not exactly a 5-star record for me.
Yeah, it's not a 5-star record for me. I think I'm going 4. I could be talked into 4.25. There's some songs that are like 4.5 stars on here that I love.
Yeah.
But they still will do those things that the Pixies do on every single record that I just am like, I don't really like that.
Yeah.
There's no Pixies record for me that is I'm a no skips person, but sometimes there is just like, man, I don't like this song. I won't skip it, but I'll just be like, man, I sure don't like this song. I've been glad when it's over. I make myself listen to the songs I don't like, and they have that on every album. So it's that like, we want to be experimental side of the band that I'm just like, but I don't want you to be. Your best stuff's your catchy stuff.
You know, you don't have to be that experimental.
Fight those urges to experiment. That's my saying.
or experiment, but then try to make it not sound experimental.
You can experiment as long as it doesn't sound like an experimental song. There's ways to do that. Just put in cool sounds. Like, you don't have to make the song bad.
You can have that weird part, but try and make it come back to like a good chorus.
Give me a hook, and then you can do your weird bridge.
Yeah. Weird bridge, weird outro. Go for it. Big hook, but like, I don't know, recorded in an echo chamber. You know, whatever. Yeah, make the production weird and experimental, but...
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed our little deep dive here on Bossanova. I enjoyed really listening to it. I think I got more out of listening to this and talking about it than I would have any other Pixies record. Well, let's do a future record. Let's just be like, what the fuck are they doing on here? Stay tuned for an I'm listening to see if I got curious enough to see what happens next. But
there's gonna be an episode where you're like, well, I did it. I listened to all 4 post-reunion Pixies records in 1 week.
And I have things to say. Give us a rating or a review on iTunes or Spotify. We say iTunes all the time. Man, Apple, you can't change your branding. We remember the one thing. You can't change it to something else. Apple Podcasts. We have a 4.9 on Spotify, which is pretty cool. Which I think it means like everybody does like 5 stars, and then like one person did 4.5.
Yeah.
I think that's how you get a 4.9, which is way better than our 3.8 on Apple, because those dorks in the beginning who got mad at us for not liking MDC, but which we've never covered. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.